Morning, everyone. We will get started. I know there'll always be a couple of others that will join throughout, but yeah, seems a good time. So yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar as part of our Sizewell C Supply Chain Business Support Program, all about why cybersecurity matters to an energy security project. My name is Ashley Shorey-Mills. I'm the Sizewell C Supply Chain Engagement Director here at the Suffolk Chamber of Commerce. And for those who have never met our team before or not aware of the work we're doing, or just as a reminder, we've been now working with EDF and subsequently Sizewell C for over 10 years now to help them deliver on their commitments around the regional and, more importantly, local supply chain on the Sizewell C project. So doing things like this to support businesses and going out to events and meeting businesses, help them understand where this project is going and importantly, where businesses fit into it. Just as a little bit of housekeeping as normal, as you will know from our previous webinars, we are recording these. The whole aim of recording them is that they are then hosted on our website as part of the support section, so that hopefully you get lots of information today, but should as many of you as possible be successful in winning contracts, it may well be that actually revisiting these in the future is beneficial to help you just get some clarity on where you sit with regards to the contracts you're entering into or the opportunities which you're going forward for. We've also, as always, got the chat and the Q&A function at the bottom. Please do feel free to put questions in the Q&A box. We will monitor them. We have ample space at the end of all the presentations today for Q&A. So any question at all that you may have, whether it is specific to do with the subject matter which we're talking about today and some of the stuff you'll hear, or if it's just more general, any project updates or any project questions you have, then please feel free, put them in the Q&A. If they do find their way into the chat box, we'll attempt to find them as well, but it's always easier if they're in the Q&A box, please. And if anyone wants to introduce themselves or has got any comments more generally, please do chuck them in the chat box. But just as a quick reminder before I show you a couple of slides, the purpose of these webinars is very much about gearing up businesses. You know, we have this huge opportunity for the next 10 to 12 years, and businesses are going to have to evolve and change, improve, grow around this opportunity that is Sizewell C. So we've done lots of these webinars on various areas, such as today, and things like health and safety, but also social value areas like working in different communities and understanding net zero and so on. And the whole aim is those things that are outside of your standard expertise of what you do as in your business, as your day-to-day work, that we can help you understand a little bit about these important other areas. And today will be, as I hope you'll understand once you hear from our speakers today, is really, really important as part of this project. Sizewell is happening. For any of you who have been anywhere near site recently, will see it is starting to transform, and they have barely even, literally, in some cases, scratched the surface. So it is now happening. It is exciting. So let's make sure we can, make the most of this. So there we go. This is the broad lineup of what we're going to attempt to cover off today. We've got speakers from Sizewell, also from Atkins, who are one of the lead contractors on the project. And then we've also got, as we always like to, the support that's available from the Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre and also Mills and Reeve to try and give you lots of different aspects to what you can do around cybersecurity for this project. So just quickly, though, as a reminder to everyone, we are there. Yes, we're Suffolk Chamber of Commerce, but we're there to represent the 6 counties of the East. So local being Suffolk and regional being the other 5 counties. We don't mind where you're from. We want to have that advantage and that benefit and that legacy felt across the entire region. So we're there for the local angle to represent you and to support you also in building your own local supply chains, to create that collaboration, to create those joint ventures and that working together ethos. And again, one of our previous webinars was all about joint ventures and how to enter into them. So please look back at that if you get the chance. That there has to be a legacy from this project. We have so much energy opportunity in this region and infrastructure opportunity in this region that let's make sure we build up the skills for Sizewell. A number of you may never win work on Sizewell, but actually through doing this, if you're a better business, you'll be better suited to work on a wind project or a rail project or a major road project or whatever it could be. So the opportunities are huge, but we must make sure that it's sustainable and proportionate growth. We can't have businesses fail off the back of Sizewell because they take on too much. So we're very much there to help you understand, where you need to be playing, where the right opportunities are for you, and who, most importantly, you need to be working with and speaking to. And of course, all of this comes down to net zero and ensuring that Sizewell part of the UK government's 2050 agenda is a transformative project when it comes to net zero technologies. And that commitment is huge. That commitment that is the reason we are doing this job of nearly £4.5 billion to this region through the supply chain. It doesn't waver. It is there. The evidence from down in Hinckley, down in Somerset, is that they have outstripped that number in value generated. So we want to see that benefit. We want to see it maximised as much as we can. And some of that will be very small, very local businesses. Others will be our larger organisations, and some will be people that will invest into our region. But actually, it's about then making sure we do the best we possibly can for Sizewell, and that post Sizewell, we have that benefit both for our region, but also actually now more widely for the UK supply chain for nuclear. Many of you have seen the news about Wilfer recently and Albury, and there's still opportunities in the north of England as well, including the unanswered question of Bradwell in Essex around what's going to happen around nuclear. So this is a huge opportunity that we want to take advantage of, and if we can build up the supply chain for Sizewell, that gives us great opportunities to export Suffolk and our region around the rest of the UK. Social value is critical. Kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. Fundamentally, the advantage that local and regional businesses get is into social value. Making sure that we are promoting UK content, with that being in the order of local, regional, national. So if you are a business in this region, the project wants to use you. The tier 1 contractors will be encouraged, targeted, contracted, incentivized to use local businesses. So we have to take advantage of that. But then we have to do it with all the other areas in mind as well. How do we increase biodiversity? How do we bring a more diverse workforce to somewhere like Sizewell? How do we touch in some of the communities that struggle in Suffolk? People always assume it is a beautiful place, but we have our own problems. We have our own challenges to overcome. How can we leverage Sizewell to do that? And all of these other areas. So we will be doing more webinars on these subjects. We've done loads already. And certainly as a business, if you want to start to tackle your social value, please reach out to the team, and we can introduce you to the organizations and the setups that are there ready to work with you. And of course, it's not just about Chamber, it's not just about Suffolk Chamber of Commerce, it's about everyone. So whoever you are, whatever business group, whatever sector you're in, feed into us. Come and speak to us. We will help you understand the ways in which you can reach into the project and who you need to be speaking to, and the ways in which you can maximise the benefit that you will feel from Sizewell in all the different ways that are possible. So yes, we are there as Suffolk Chamber of Commerce to do this job, but we need as many people as possible to come forward, explain what it is you want, explain what your needs are, and we will help you understand where Sizewell fits in. So no more from me, you'll be pleased to hear. So at this point, I will hand over to James Costello from Sizewell, who's going to talk from a Sizewell perspective about cyber security and the whole supply chain angle. Thank you, James.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ash. So today I just wanted to, in a few brief slides, mention a few things. I wanted to talk a little bit about our environment, the threats and risks that face us as an organization, and share a few things. So there's some official publications that may be useful references for you, and cover the things we need to deliver. We wanted to address our approach and how we work together with our supply chain for joined up and mutual assurance. And then finally, some resources I think could be useful to a lot of people. So into the first slide, please, Ash. So the environment we work in is unique to some extent, but it's worth mentioning that we are leveraging the very obvious benefits of being the second of a kind. So Sizewell C will follow very much in the footsteps of Hinkley Point C, and leverage much of the same platform and technology. So we've got that foresight that HPC didn't have, so we can use that to shape our approach, avoid pitfalls, and make the obvious savings and efficiencies that come with that. And I suppose an important part of that is the second point we wanted to lean into, which is our principles, our architecture principles. So whenever we commission a service or a partner to do that for us, we've got a set of very consistent principles we use to apply to that, to test and make sure, does it stand the test of time? Does it work alongside everything else we've got? Does it introduce unexpected or indeed beneficial integration points? So that's something which tends to echo through everything we do. And in terms of how we do it, it's worth mentioning that since Hinkley Point C, of course, things have moved on. And one of those things is the cloud. So as you can imagine, wanting to be a modern evergreen organization, excuse me, we have used cloud as our default approach. So that was a conscious decision for a number of reasons, not least the velocity it offers us and business agility that comes with that, but also the ability to move very, very quickly against new and emerging opportunities, but also avoid a lot of the legacy risks that tend to creep into environments. And then moving forwards, of course, there's our common approaches. So we don't exist as an island at all. So we've got some shared organisations between Hinkley Point C and the rest of the licensees, including Sizewell. So we've got the EPRP team who provide shared implementation services, and we've also got nuclear security who provide that guidance across licensees. And then certainly pertinent to today's call with some of our partners, we very much focus on internal and external assurance. So we've got the 3 lines of defense, and we look to get external audit and accreditations as appropriate. Next slide, please, Ash. So this is the slide I mentioned where I wanted to surface just a small selection of documents which may be useful to people in a delegation to shape and position their responses and to get an early sight of what we might expect. So in no particular order, we've got the UK National Risk Register there, which outlines the challenges likely to face, or in fact do face the nation and the organisations within. And then obviously focusing upon today's discussion and where I work, we've got the civil nuclear cybersecurity strategy, which goes into more detail specific to this vertical, specific to this industry and its working patterns and so on. And then one which is worth looking at because it comes with associated very high frequency, certainly weekly updates, is the NCSC. So they publish an annual review of the likely threats and risks that we all face. But they've also got, as many of you will have seen, a very, very rich blog site where they publish industry specific, technology specific, even threat actor specific articles. And I certainly commend you consider looking at those. So with those documents noted, there's some very obvious themes you'll find throughout those if you haven't already. There's the detection and mitigation of vulnerabilities. And of course, that's a very broad range of outcomes. There's the vulnerability of a particular product, vulnerabilities associated with combinations of products, and then the ever-present risk of drift over time. So as your environment gets larger over time, you've got more points of integration, more hand-on, hand-off. You need to be very, very careful that you've got some kind of contract between those. And then the second bullet point is probably the one that I think tends to get the most press attention because of very obvious impact and our exposure to it, both in the workplace and at home, is the risk of phishing. So this is one of the all-time best asymmetricals. So for very, very little effort on the part of the would-be attacker, they can craft a mail to you or to your organization, and they normally work on numbers. So for very low cost, they can target a large number of organizations with just slight incremental changes to those. And if unfortunately you fell foul of that, then there's a number of outcomes, including, of course, malware tends to get a lot of notoriety, but also let's bear in mind ransomware. So there's been a number of blog publications, including NCSC and their American cousins, the CISA, and that can lead to very adverse, regulatory and media attention, but also secondary attacks once they've got that initial data. So it's something we tend to put a lot of effort into, and we'll talk on a later slide about some of the controls you can potentially use to mitigate against that. Today's call is all about supply chain security. So the partners, our expectations of them and future partners, and indeed our tier ones and the supply chain below that. And then I know others on the call will be talking about our position in CNI, critical national infrastructure. It makes us a very obvious target, unfortunately. So it's something we need to be very, very cautious of. And the rest of this deck, and indeed today's presentation, will certainly speak of that. Taken together all the things we've mentioned above, there is very obvious reasons for compliance against expectations. And given the industry we're in, there's a number of stakeholders, but of course that includes the government, the NCSC, and we talk about that again towards the end, and indeed our regulatory requirements, the Office of Nuclear Regulator, the SIAPs. And then finally on this slide, we wanted to talk about just how closely we work with our supply chain partners. So this isn't a one-time activity at all. It's a initial and ongoing assurance, and that's largely mutual assurance. And we actually look to keep the terms of that assurance relevant. So the threats we face in the future certainly won't be the ones we faced in the past. And we need to update our controls and our assurance to reflect that, to make sure our controls are complete, they're comprehensive, they're accurate, and so on and so forth. So on to the next slide, please, Ash. So we talked a little bit about our approach and how we work together, and this slide's really to express that a bit further. So we talk very much about care, due diligence. So we're very, very careful in the assessment of potential partners and the services they provide. So what we tend to do is a range of things, and it's worth mentioning that the requirements are expressed to suppliers through what we call our contractor baseline library. This is all based on relevant good practice from some of the security frameworks we've touched upon, and those are issued to contractors alongside the contract. And then, of course, there's a variety of different contract types. So if the sensitivity is such, that might involve a review of the contractor's procedures, their operations, and even their facilities. Again, it depends on the nature of the contract. The second bullet, we've kind of reinforced a couple of times that we want to do this in a collaborative way, a very cohesive and honestly comprehensive way. So we look to set up and develop our standards and our assurance over time. So there will be updates to frameworks. For example, last month there was an update to the NIST CSF framework, and more recently internally we've been updating the solution we use to actually issue those third-party security assurance contracts. And then what we also try to do is, rather than start from a blank sheet of paper with the opportunities but also all the risks that come with that, the third bullet is something we wanted to touch upon about leveraging the very strong security which leading software providers and certainly cloud service providers can offer you. So it can be a much faster route to a secure baseline. So we talk a lot about secure by design, but of course it's about arriving at what those controls are, and then when you've arrived at them, how do you actually meaningfully deploy them and check that they're deployed. And as you can imagine, all of the major software providers and CSPs, cloud service providers, have realized that, and they will all provide their respective approach to that. So it might be a baseline you can deploy, which configures the environment in such a way or prevents certain outcomes. But it certainly is something we've seen with the Microsoft environment, for example, the ServiceNow environment, which is very strong indeed, and certainly worth looking at. And many of these providers will provide you significant deployment support also. So Microsoft have Fast Track, ServiceNow have their engagement team. It's absolutely worth looking at. And then moving along a little bit, we talk about the development of robust controls and then the consequent monitoring environment. So when you've established what your control set is and you've worked to deploy that across your estate, and you think you've got yourself to an appropriate posture, so for ourselves and also with our partners, you need a way of meaningfully monitoring that. So are the controls accurate? Are they actually deploying? Have they stopped something, for example? And there's a number of ways you can do that. There's a whole load of technical stuff we could go into in a future webinar perhaps. But suffice to say, the monitoring of the environment, your SIEM tool, your SOC operation is essential. You'll need it to evidence certain things, which we'll come on to in the final slide. But you can also use it to reduce down your exposure to risk. The faster you can discover something, the quicker you can address it. So you've got that least exposure to risk. And then finally, whilst there's a whole load of controls in the environment, one of the things you'll see come through in those documents on the previous slide, things you'll see in the news, unfortunately, and what I touched upon about phishing, is you very much need to consider how you communicate with partners. So you'll have business-to-business direct API connections, for example, transmitting data, but telemetry would suggest that email and Teams are still the dominant communication channels, and they are the dominant way that would-be attackers will try to get into your environment using lures, using phishing. So I think bolster those controls as much as you can. Have very aggressive thresholds against phishing, impersonation, um, the email security, which is a specific item we're coming on to. But also think about awareness. Think about how you can prepare your end users so that they're aware and they've got some experience of how this might look in practice so that they can move away from it and protect your organization. So on to the next slide, please. Here we've got some of the resources we've touched upon. So I think I commend everybody, if they haven't already, to look at these and consider if they're of use to your business, because they are things we use, they're things our existing partners use, and they're things which you'll see come up throughout NCSC and ONR documentation. So from the top, NCSC we've name checked a number of times, and what they've done is to curate a whole load of what they call ACD in their blogs, active cyber defense. So they've put together some core controls which can really reduce down the likelihood of common sort of commodity attacks against your environment. So we've got early warning. So if you seed this environment with your domain, for example, they can let you know if they see anything exposed or likely to expose your environment. But they also provide specific scanning services. So again, once you've implemented your detail into that portal, you've registered and put in your domain name, they'll scan for your mail security controls. They'll check your website is appropriately configured. So things like DNS controls, things like DKIM and DMARC, just to avoid any likelihood of those being hijacked. So the assured consultancy piece is also worth mentioning. So NCSC have actually pre-checked many partners, those partners being in the pen testing space, being in the the um, exercise space, CIE, for example. So you've got that baseline, you know they've been checked, and you can use them to secure yourself with confidence. And then probably the biggest one, I'd imagine, the one that gets mentioned most regularly is Cyber Essentials. So there's two flavors. There's Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Effectively, it starts with a questionnaire, and you're given really quite substantial readiness tools to help with that. And then moving on to Plus, you actually get the external assurance, the audit piece, where they interactively check your controls. They check the posture of your end user devices, for example. And then last but not least, because I've mentioned software partners and service providers in the cloud, which is something we've got quite a lot of experience of, something people don't always take on board is the staggering extent of online material there is. So we've touched upon Microsoft, so there's a link there to their security training material, but it's also worth mentioning that they can provide you development environments at a reduced or sometimes free rate, so you can test these things ahead of time. And you can also use that to bolster your capability. So as you're bringing on people perhaps new to the business, to de-risk it to some extent, you can have an air-gapped environment where they can do their learning, they can prep for their certifications before they actually use your live environment. So I think that's where I wanted to end on that slide, Ash. So I think moving on to the next one, please. I'll be introducing John from Atkins.
Just make sure, is John. Ah, there we go. John is online. Fantastic. I know we had a bit of the irony of, cybersecurity issues, but good. John's here, so I will off my video and leave it to you, John.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me? Just to is that? Oh my God.
Got you, John.
Yeah,
all good.
Okay. Sorry. I kind of wasn't aware that Zoom is blocked on our network, so I'm fighting through from my side. So apologies if they say you should never start with an apology. I thought, following on from what James has been talking about in terms of kind of like the technical side of protecting data in the supply chain, I thought maybe it was worth, particularly because we're focusing probably on Sizewell C, is looking at the regulation of information as well, and particularly, what type of information we're protecting, how we do it, and how it's regulated by the Office for Nuclear Regulation. I myself have been in this space for about 8 years. Post-military, I started on nuclear cybersecurity, and then focused on nuclear supply chain. So I'd say I'm a relatively good authority on it. If we could move on to the first slide, just wanted to kind of contextualize the supply chain. The nuclear supply chain obviously is massive. If we consider all the systems, structures, components that go into a licensed nuclear facility, it's particularly one like Sizewell, where you've got 2 units. It's absolutely massive. So, and in terms of the regulation, the Office for Nuclear Regulation is limited in its vires. If you want, it can't really regulate information. It's sovereign. So the contracting authorities, as they are known, the likes of Sizewell C, the likes of HPC, Rolls-Royce, SMR, they kind of have to pick up where the regulator can't. So they have to extend their assurance beyond the national boundary, really, into whichever country the supply chain is. So, notwithstanding that, if we go on to the next slide, the ONR has enshrined in law from the Nuclear Industry Security Regulations 2003 the Regulation 22 duty, which is sensitive nuclear information. Now, this information, as it says there on the front page of the policy, is information concerning the use, storage, and transport of nuclear and other radioactive materials. So, and what we'll do is we'll move on to the next slide, and just for a little bit of a definition. So, as it says, information relating to activities carried out on nuclear sites or at other premises, basically. So, I quite like the definition that's below, because that gives you a bit of kind of reason. Is, whilst not taking precedent over the legal definitions, this is information relating to activities carried out in relation to that are of value to an adversary. So the information that we're trying to protect is information that an adversary could use to exploit or nuclear material, or cause what they call a unacceptable radiological consequence. So it might be physical security, but obviously in this sense, we're talking about cyber security of information in the supply chain. So that very much applies. Next slide. So this one is just to kind of articulate how Regulation 22, sensitive nuclear information, is delegated from duty holder to duty holder. So the ONR, the Office for Nuclear Regulation, is the main duty holder and holds the duty of Regulation 22. Now they delegate the this duty to contracting authorities, as I mentioned, who are typically nuclear licensees. So they then can further delegate the Regulation 22 duty into the supply chain. Now, this might be to a company like Atkins Realis, or other. Then we can buy contracts into tier 2 and potentially tier 3. And the way we do that is on the next slide, we have we take the classifications. So this is what you're seeing here on the right is a typical security aspects letter. So the typical classifications that you're going to see in contracts are official sensitive SNI, secret, and very, very, very rarely top secret. Now, these are kind of graded on the impact that the information would have if it was compromised or if the adversary got hold of it. So obviously the bulk of the government security classified information is official sensitive SNI. And as I say, you do have some secret stuff. Now, what each of the contracting authorities will do is they will develop a set of security requirements, and they will convey these in the contract to suppliers. Now, each supplier will have to agree to each of the requirements in those, and there's a detailed set of cybersecurity requirements in those requirements, and each supplier has to agree. And then what we do is we take the security aspects letter that you can see, which has the scope, the classification of the contract, which locations they'll be using to process the information, which systems they'll be using, IT, OT there, because we have to consider that it's not all IT networks that are handling this information in the supply chain. There is some operational technology requirements too, which is obviously the industrial control systems that control the power plant, and any additional controls and signatures. So basically, you're in this, you will have your approved locations. So the contracting authority will go out into the supply chain, will, as James alluded to earlier, will inspect each of these locations, will inspect each of these IT or OT systems. They will list them in the security aspects letter, and they are the only places at which you are, or on which you are allowed to process this classified information. And it's probably worth mentioning that in relation to classification, the technical controls that you have on systems are also graded to the classification of the data. So the higher the classification of the data, the stronger the technical controls. So you'll be looking at something that could be internet facing for OSSNI, into secret, where it would be a totally isolated environment, so that there'll be no access. Next slide. Just going into a little bit about how the ONR regulates the information. Obviously, they've developed a set of security assessment principles, which is a outcome-based set of principles where they give you the outcome, and by you I mean the duty holder. So each duty holder that handles sensitive nuclear information has to then develop their security plan to meet those outcomes. And if you go to the next slide, this is the high-level delivery principles, which are on the left-hand side. Now, in terms of supply chain, the ONR only regulates against 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. The rest are reserved for licensed nuclear sites or the contracting authorities, if you want. So, and we're focusing today on cybersecurity. So delivery principle 7 is that and if we flick to the next slide here, which are quite clear. So that's on the left is your FSIP 7, your fundamental security principle 7, which is, duty holders must implement and maintain cyber security and information assurance arrangements. And then it's further subdivided, I won't read each one of them, into, we need to have effective cyber and risk management, information security, protection of nuclear technology, physical protection of information, which also comes under cybersecurity and information assurance, and preparation for and response to cybersecurity incidents. Now, how you meet those outcomes is up to you. However, you will be assessed against them, and if you're found wanting, then they can the regulator can address those issues. Next slide. So each contracting authority and each supplier under that contracting authority has access to the ONR's portal. It's called the WIRED portal, Well-Informed Regulatory Decisions. All contracts which carry a classification of official sensitive S&I or above are logged on the portal. Each contracting authority lists their locations, as does each supplier. And then once the contract is added by the contracting authority, the supplier or myself will then add locations and systems and complete a bunch of questionnaires to provide assurance that we have met the delivery principles that I laid out in the previous slide. So that the bottom graphic is just an example of them. The dotted line around Reg 22 and it being FSIPs 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. As I've said, the contracting authorities conduct interventions, and ONR can also, if they have any concerns, if there's been multiple, say, incidents in the supply chain, the ONR can conduct their own interventions and enforcements if required. I've already mentioned the IT OT piece, but it's just to say that we've got more than just IT in the supply chain. Quickly, just a bit. I'm conscious of time. The next slide is just around incidents. So we have the incident notification form on the right, which is completed for any compromise of classified information in the supply chain. And we also have this, NCSC exercise in a box, which is a great tool for practicing your incident response for different types of incidents. And obviously, we collect learning to learn for future reference. And the last slide, you'll be glad to hear, is just around other government departments and NCSC. As James has already alluded to, NCSC is the National Technical Authority for cybersecurity in any industry actually, but they have a dedicated civil nuclear team. They have the CISP, which is a platform on which you can collaborate and share learning, and that's where they also publish their threat products, which James alluded to. As again James said about Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials is key now. It's being driven by the Department for Energy and Net Zero through their cyber security, civil nuclear cybersecurity strategy, and each supplier needs to meet the requirements of Cyber Essentials and should be certificated to it really, and if not, Cyber Essentials Plus. Just thought it was worth mentioning the 14 cloud security principles also, because we're as an industry, lots of us transitioning to cloud, including government security classified information, and we have those 14 security principles which are developed to protect against compromise. And that is it. Sorry, I know we're over, but hope that was helpful.
Perfect. Thank you very much, John. And so if I can ask if Paul is available, please, if Paul can camera on and unmute, and off we go. Thank you, Paul. Brilliant.
Thank you, John. Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre. So who are we? We're a police company that offers free membership to any organisation in our region to help them become more cyber resilient. And the key thing is free membership. Slightly cynical, of course, because you've already paid for us in our taxes, because we are funded by the police and by the Home Office. And we are de facto the operational delivery of the National Cybersecurity Centre in our region, though we do other things beside that. Just a bit about myself very quickly. So I'm a former superintendent. I was a detective superintendent at Essex Police. I was the head of the regional cybercrime unit. And I was responsible for things like dark web team, a lot of covert assets, which we use in the online space to investigate cyber criminals. And I moved to the Cyber Resilience Centre as a superintendent in 2021, and I've been there for the last 3 years. Though I retired as a cop. I'm now a member of police staff. But all of the staff, either police officers like Jim or police staff like myself. So next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so just very quickly, what we'll be talking about today is just look at the context of the landscape. You know, what's the scale of the threat posed by cyber criminals in the UK and in our region. A little bit about Cyber Resilience 101. It's fairly basic stuff, but there's a reason why it's fairly basic. Partly because we haven't enough time to talk about it in more detail, but and look at what the government support of businesses is and how the Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre can help your organisation to become more cyber resilient itself, and a few next steps as well. So that's that. Thank you. If you move to the next slide. Thank you. Right. So a load of numbers on here. We haven't got time to go into the detail of all of them, but you know, I think we all hear the stats. You know, 30% of small businesses fell victim to cybercrime in the last 12 months. We do a lot of customer engagement or consumer engagement in the community, and we're now finding that almost every single business that we talk to has been a victim. It's not a question of they know somebody's been a victim; they've been a victim of a phishing attack, a business email compromise, come onto that, or whatever it might be, a ransomware attack. So it's pretty much consistent that everybody is becoming victims of these sorts of crimes. And one of the reasons why, it doesn't matter how big or small you are as a business, it's about, do you exhibit a vulnerability which a criminal can then take advantage of? I use the analogy when I was a cop back in the mid-1990s and with a top hat on walking around the streets, and we'd go to theft from motor vehicles, yeah? And, you know, a very common crime, people breaking into cars and stealing car stereos, not something that happens a huge amount now. And when the criminals go out and they walk along the street, they test a car door handle, and it's locked, so they go to the next one, it's locked, go to the next one, unlocked, go into the car, steal the car stereo. So that particular car owner wasn't actually the target of that criminal. When the criminal went out that night, he had no idea who the victims of his car thievery were going to be, and it was the unlocked car, the vulnerability, which was the target. And that's the same in cyberspace. You know, if you've got you know, vulnerabilities online, which we can talk about, then you are more likely to become a victim of a cyber attack than if you are more resilient and you've got more of those doors closed. I mean, there are some fairly horrific kind of stats you look at. You know, less than 20% of SMEs, small and medium sized companies, have got cyber insurance in the UK. Less than 1% have got cyber essentials accreditation. We've talked a bit about that. We'll talk a bit more about it later on. You know, training staff is not consistent in the SME space. And the bottom one there, about only 1% of policing resource is being set aside by the government to tackle cyber and fraud, because online fraud is just a different point at the same timeline. Yeah, so the cyber attack happens and the fraud normally follows afterwards in most cases. So 50% of all recorded crime we expect for the next 12 months, 1% of policing resources to tackle it. So the police can help, and we are part of that help, but it's much more about making yourself better prepared. Don't wait for the crime to happen first, and then look to the police for solving it, because it's probably not going to happen that way. I think we spoke about this before the presentation with the group of presenters today, and you know, the National Cybersecurity Centre issued a threat alert in 2023 warning of escalated threats emanating from cyber attacks by state-sponsored threat actors against UK critical national infrastructure, which is what all new contractors on the call are hoping to be part of. I would say that from my experience, the Russians and others who are very much part of this are very aware of these sorts of engagement opportunities. They will know, you know, who contractors are in these CNI in these CNI projects, and if they know who you are, then you do become more vulnerable. I said most crimes don't target specific companies; they target a vulnerability. But if you are known to be involved in one of these CNI infrastructures, you know, projects, then you are more likely to become a victim of a crime, because it's in the benefits of our enemies to destabilize the economy of the country in which we live and work. So just be aware of that. And even if you're not successful in the contracting process, the fact that you've been part of this process may well escalate the risk that you face in the future. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, so basically, when we started off 3 years ago, in the centre, we started speaking to businesses, you know, in lots of different forums, presentations, webinars, face-to-face, networking events, trade events, going out to the place of businesses in the high streets and in the retail parks, industrial car parks as well. And we assumed that this graph shows what we thought we'd find. So we assumed that most SMEs in the UK, and we've spoken to thousands, and there's a network with tens of thousands of companies, and have these conversations on a one-to-one basis with them. We thought they'd have some idea about what they needed to do to protect themselves. What we actually found was that most businesses have got nothing in place, or very little in place at all. If you click the next bit of the slide, please, it just shows the. And so that's basically the gap that we've been trying to fill, is between getting to, you know, an almost zero cyber knowledge and cyber protection and awareness to some. You'd probably put Cyber Essentials on this scale, maybe slightly higher up maybe 6 or 7 out of 10. Most businesses don't know where to report a crime if it happens. They don't know where to get help when it happens, or even beforehand, and they've got very poor or no basic cyber hygiene. So that's what we've been seeing over the last few years. So that reality quite shocked us as a network, to be honest with you. Okay, next slide, please. So we can quickly look at some of the current threats. Some of these you'll already know about and have been mentioned. So yeah, phishing is the main way that we find that companies become victims of a cyber attack, and it normally, you know, precedes something else that happens. So a phishing attack will then lead to a business email compromise, or to a fraud, or to a ransomware attack. You know, phishing attacks can be, you know, fairly, I say it, easily stopped. You know, training is obviously a big part of that. There's some other things as well we can talk about in relation to that as well. Hacking of social media and email. So a lot of small companies just use Facebook Marketplace, or, you know, equivalent kind of like social media platforms. And we're seeing businesses, you know, routinely having their social media hacked and taken over. What's the first thing they do when they take over your account? They put multi-factor authentication onto it, so you can't get back into it again, and that's the end of your social media business. And it can be kind of, you know, it can lead to an end to the business itself as well. Many businesses can't recover from it. Business email compromise, you know, is something that you're all probably aware of. You know, criminals hijack an existing organizational email account, normally through a phishing attack, and use it to conduct further attacks. We've been attacked as an organization over the last few days by somebody who's had their LinkedIn account compromised, and also their email account compromised. They've tried to contact us and other people within our network to try and get details, and, you know, of our own emails, and try and get data from us. We've talked about ransomware. Ransomware is the kind of one of the most scary, pernicious things that can happen to you as an organization. We've dealt with lots of companies that have gone through ransomware attacks, and it's not a very pleasant thing to witness as an outsider, never mind as somebody who's going through it. If any of you have been through it, you'll know exactly what I mean. Interestingly, back in, I think it was 2022, the government had a number of tier 1 threats to the security of the country. There were two things in there. One was war and one was terrorism. And in 2022, they added ransomware because they realized it's such an important risk that needs to be mitigated and protected against. And we've seen, quite recently, the universities in our region being attacked, DDoS, denial of service attacks, which are probably a fate for a ransomware attack. The British Library, Post Office, you name it. It's happening all the time. But it also happened against smaller companies. We had a law firm last year in our region that was 20 members of staff, and they were ransomwared, and it probably cost them around about £250,000 to get back on their feet again. If they hadn't done all those measures in place that they needed to get their business back, including paying the ransom, which we would have obviously never advised to do, but they did, then they would have gone out of business. So it affects a whole range of organisations from relatively small to relatively big. But the one that's not on there that I don't tend to put in for business presentations is just vulnerabilities. So I think last year Microsoft announced that there were 27,000 plus software that we all use, from Microsoft, iOS, all the very different softwares that we use beyond that, which basically the only thing you can really do is patch when you get told. I mean, there are other things perhaps some of the technical people may know about, but if you don't know about the vulnerability, then there's not a lot you can do about it until you're told about it. But obviously, it can be a lead off for something like a zero-day attack, which we've seen many times in this country over the last few years as well. Yeah, they're the main threats that we're currently seeing against SMEs in the UK. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So this might sound like a really obvious one, and I know that this table is sometimes criticised as being simplistic and not taking into account other protections you might have on your on your sites, on your networks. But just to show how weak passwords are, unless they do contain upper lowercase letters, numbers, and they're quite long as well. Going back to that law firm that got attacked, the admin password from their website to get into their network, which then led to all their data being stolen, was the name of the company followed by the words admin, all in lowercase. And I know people are going, sure, that doesn't happen now. It still happens. It happens a lot, it's something that we come across all the time. So basically, the stronger your password, it's your first line of defense, as the slide says, and the better protected that you will be. Okay, next slide, please. And this is the National Cybersecurity Centre's recommendation around passwords, about using 3 random words. If you haven't heard about it, then I think you'll get a copy of these slides later. You'll be able to do it yourself. But taking a memory, reduce it to 3 words, so you end up with tree, smashed, escaped. Combine them in random order. That by itself will not often be enough, as you know. You need to have numbers and upper and lowercase letters and characters to be sufficient to satisfy many security algorithms and passwords on websites these days. But you end up with an escaped 100 smashed exclamation mark tree. Still quite complicated, but still a lot easier to remember than a lot of the more complex passwords that you might see. Complexity, unfortunately, by itself is not the best way of going ahead, because if you can't remember it, you won't use it. You'll go back to using password 123. But obviously, this taken in conjunction with, and again, this is the National Cybersecurity Advice, using a password manager, of which there are plenty out there, both commercial and also open source. Something that we'd always recommend that everybody does. And putting the password onto your having these passwords on your main email accounts is the main thing, and you need to protect your email accounts really, really, really carefully. Okay, next one, please. And we've all heard of it, and surprisingly enough, most of us still don't do it as much as we should do anyway. So 2-step verification, multi-factor authentication. I don't need to explain what that actually entails, but it's something that we recommend that you have on your main email accounts and on your social media accounts as well. Again, just as an aside, if we look at the current sort of series of attacks against various different platforms, there has been a campaign against LinkedIn users over the last 6 months or so. It's been confirmed by the National Management Centre, who are the police cybersecurity company we work very closely with. If you have a LinkedIn account, make sure you put multi-factor authentication onto your LinkedIn account, whether it's on your phone or whether it's on your laptop. Just make sure that's what you do. It takes 30 seconds. You go to your profile, go to security settings, enable it. It will then offer you the option of using an authenticator tool or a text message from your phone into your main device. But if you do that, you'll almost certainly protect yourself from the current campaign against LinkedIn users. So I'd urge you all to do that. Okay, next page, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, and another couple of things as well, about understanding where you currently are. And like I said, most businesses are right at the very beginning of that journey, and they don't have all these fancy schmancy things in place. They just don't. And certainly, this is not just considered for yourself as your organisation. It's the way you need to look at your supply chain as well. And if you're using a sole trader, a contractor, or a consultant, do they have these things in place as well? Because if they haven't, they put you at risk as well. So again, I'd recommend you go to the Have I Been Pwned site. I'm on there. My data is out in the dark web, and yours probably is as well. But it just shows you that your passwords and usernames are already out there. And if they are, you need to make sure you change your password clearly. And the NCSC Cyber Action Plan is a pretty quick and dirty way of doing that initial assessment of where you currently sit as to what your cyber hygiene might be. But we recommend both of those tools to find out where you currently sit. Okay, next slide, please. So, as I said, we're a police-led, business-focused organisation. We offer this collaboration between policing, industry experts and academia in a way that policing has never really worked before. The bottom line is the government sat up a few years ago and thought, cybercrime is getting worse and worse and worse, and cybercrime and online fraud is getting worse and worse and worse, and businesses are really at risk. And the conventional National Cybersecurity Centre and policing framework wasn't really doing it. The sad thing is most businesses don't know about the NCSC, don't go to their website, don't look at their tools, and they produce some really good stuff, but most people just don't know about them. So if they don't know about them, they may as well not exist in the first place. So we've been set up to basically engage regionally and locally with businesses, what we do. So we've got about 1,500 organisations across our region, which is the eastern region as far as this is concerned, and also Kent as well. And we are, we're already seeing the work that we're doing. We're protecting businesses across the region. We're just there to help to increase the resilience of small and medium-sized businesses, but also the third sector and the public sector as well. We work with lots of schools as well. And the key thing is it's free to join. And I've spoken to one of the organisers of this event. And what I'd like to do, and please let the organisers know if you don't want this to happen. I'd like you all to our centre. If we go to the next centre, I'll show you what you get as a member of the centre. So you get a free monthly newsletter with regular updates on threats and vulnerabilities. We do lots of webinars and blogs with our partners as well. We also work in partnership with the local police protect officers as well, and they do lots and lots of free services, and you can access all of that through us. We provide a program which is free of charge called Little Steps, which is kind of bite-sized practical information to help you prepare business to be more cyber resilient, and also for cyber essentials, and if indeed that's what you want to do. Free tools such as the National Cybersecurity Centre stuff. We make it sector specific, so you don't have to go to finding for it. We'll send you what you need. Police cyber alarm, which I'll talk about briefly in a second, and other free tools from policing as well. And you can speak to a member of our centre if you so desire. So yeah, it's a free service that we can offer, and we also work with commercial partners. I think maybe Spritz Monkey's on the call. They're one of our Cyber Essentials partners who we can refer you to do the certification process for Cyber Essentials, or to do the Cyber Advisor stuff as well, which helps you become Cyber Essentials trained as well. So we have some commercial relationships as well. Okay, next slide, please. So we've talked about Cyber Essentials very briefly. I think it's basically, it looks at 5 control measures, which are, if memory serves, firewalls, device and software settings, access control, and patching of software. They're the 5 areas that they look at. I've spoken to Sutcliffe Insurance, who offer £25,000, I think it is, of free cyber insurance to everybody who's certified with Cyber Essentials. You go through the process and you're certified, which costs a few £100s, admittedly, but it's like an annual MOT for your business. They've been able to compare organisations that have cyber insurance, that don't have Cyber Essentials, and those that do have Cyber Essentials and have the cyber insurance as well. And they are able to say categorically that they get 10 times as many claims from those that don't have Cyber Essentials that do. So why wouldn't we have it as an organisation? We're Cyber Essentials Plus as an organisation. Why wouldn't any of you not, have something, either Cyber Essentials as a bare minimum, or something else which is very similar? Because it does work. Okay, next slide, please. And yeah, Police Cyber Alarm. They're another police company like ours, but they're national, and they are able to provide a free download of a tool, which is the Police Cyber Alarm Analyzer, effectively, which sits on your external firewall. So if you have a commercial firewall, it sits on the firewall, and it looks for a bit like the early warning thing from National Cyber Security Centre, but it works in a slightly different way, and will pick things up that early warning won't pick up, and vice versa. So recommend both, actually. They're both free. It also does, it goes back in the form, the details of malicious, suspicious activity go back to a national database. It's only logs we're collecting, there's no data there, it's just the security logs, and allows the police to build up what we call a rich picture of intelligence pertaining to cyber attacks around the country, something which nobody else does. Not even the NCSC, there's no commercial organisation that. So it's a really good thing. I said it's free of charge and something that we can talk about if you want to further on down the line, but it's something that we do as well. Okay, right, last slide I think it is now. Thank you. Would you mind clicking through these? I think it's about 5 bits. Just want to pick on one thing that I think it was it James mentioned about web check and mail check. They're both really good services. However, at the time of reading on their website, it's not currently available to the private sector. I don't know whether that will change, whether or not this CNI project will allow that to happen, but it's open to sort of government, schools, charities, and the list on the website which says how you can register for it. But yeah, web check and mail check are, like I said, at the moment aren't currently available to the private sector. Like I said, that might change, but it's just worth noting. Whereas early warning is, like I said, if and when you join our centre, these are the sort of things we can clarify with you in the weeks and months ahead. So, other opportunities. It's more of a sort of summary of where we're at really. So, by being a member of the centre, you can obviously tell other people that you're a member of the centre. It demonstrates to your customers, it demonstrates to your supply chain, both up and down, and your peer group, that you are actively doing something to look after their data and your data and the customer's data. Because we will actually take you through various stages and introduce you to certain things which you may or may not be aware of before. Much of it, like I said, is police, NCSC, completely free of charge. Most of it is. And also, we'd like you as future members to join and to promote our centre across your own website and comms, and I know a lot of our partners do that. To tell them about the free offer that we provide as a police organisation. If you want us to do presentations, events, conferences, we are, there's a number of us, we're always willing to do that, to promote ourselves as an organisation. But I come back to the fact we are a free service that is being offered to you by the government, but also to raise awareness and do kind of awareness raising sessions, either internally within your own organisations or with your supply chain. There are some more formal partnership arrangements that can be raised through us or through the national centre as well. And there are a load of non-commercial and some commercial opportunities that we can work on together. Like I said, Spritz Monkey, if they are on the call, they are one of our Cyber Essentials partners. And you also get access to our students. So I've already spoken about students, but we work with an organisation called Cyberpath, who sit within the National Centre, and they are able to provide a whole range of what I call fairly low-level introductory awareness raising cyber security services. And they're university undergraduates taken from across our region. So Anglia Ruskin University, UEA, University of Kent, name it a few, University of Suffolk, and they're all doing cyber courses, and we train them and we mentor them and we peer review their work. And they do some fantastic stuff, supporting businesses. And also what it means is when they come out of the university course, they have got this real life experience of actually done stuff for real commercial companies, which makes them obviously more sellable as selling themselves, and more useful to the cybersecurity sector, because the talent pipeline is a massive issue in this country. I haven't really got into it, I haven't got time to go into it, but there's a massive shortfall in appropriately trained and skilled cybersecurity professionals in the UK. And this is part of the process to try and do that. And because they're students, okay, it sounds a little bit cynical again, but actually we don't have to pay them very much. So the services that they can offer are businesses that couldn't afford, full price services from a commercial institution. And just one final thing, because I get told off for this sometimes by our commercial partners, that the cybersecurity professionals, they're like lawyers, they're like accountants. They are really highly trained, and the ones that we work with are really, really good. But the students offer an alternative to that, if that was of interest to you guys as well. I think that is it. If you click on the next, I think probably and any question, links, yeah. So there's some links there for you to go to have a look at. Please do report your crimes. If you become a victim of a cybercrime, then we always encourage you to report to the police. And there's some links here to report suspicious emails and websites as well. Links to have our pwned cyber action plan and to ourselves as well. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just for Jason, just let everyone know, obviously, as normal, we will share all the slides, and therefore you'll get all the links, etc., on here via the email and via the slides. Over to you, Jack.
Thank you very much for that, Ashley. Great to be here, and welcome to this part of the session. So we're going to be looking at why cybersecurity matters for an energy project, but we're going to be looking at that from a legal perspective. My name is Jagvinder Singh Kang. I'm a partner as well as the international and UK head of IT law at the leading national law firm Mills and Reeves. So at our firm, we've got about 1,300 people, and we are one of the largest law firms in the UK. My background is I am a specialist IT, data protection and cyber lawyer. I'm also a qualified software engineer, so I have first-class honours in computer science and software engineering. So I like to put everything together with a holistic view, and you'll see that's what we're going to do during today's session. In today's session, I'm also going to be drawing upon my expertise from having done this for over 25 years, advising the full range of organizations from innovative startups to global corporates. So bringing to this my expertise on advising on billions of pounds worth of tech deals, undertaking global GDPR compliance projects for some of the biggest names in the world in their industry sectors, and helping companies through cyber breaches and mitigation and preparation, including those cyber breaches which have hit the national news headlines, and have worked with on matters which have involved law enforcement in the UK and the FBI in the US as well. So it's kind of bringing all of this together. So with that in mind, let's go on to our next slide, Ashley, and I want to just set the scene initially. So I would like you to cast your mind back to the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack, which actually occurred in the US a few years ago. So some of you may have remembered that the Colonial Pipeline, a vital oil pipeline in the US, it suffered a ransomware attack in 2021. Within the space of only 2 hours, 100 gigabytes of data was stolen. Ransomware was deployed onto their systems. It affected their computer systems, including their billing and accounting systems. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because the initial ransomware effect was on those systems rather than on the systems which were pushing out the oil through the US. But the pipeline was shut down for a number of days. And the reason for this was to seek to ensure that the ransomware didn't spread to other systems. Now, this shutdown as a result of the ransomware attack, it had wide-ranging implications. It wasn't just for the company itself or the organization itself. It affected consumers who couldn't get fuel. It affected airlines who were reliant upon fuel. So you can see when we are talking about the energy industry, when we are talking about the infrastructure industry, it can, if it is targeted, it can have significant effects which are wider than just the organization itself. So that's something important to keep in mind during today's session. It's important, something to keep in mind when you are getting involved in the Sizewell project as well. For that particular matter, Colonial Pipeline, they paid the hackers 75 Bitcoins, it equated to 4.4 million US dollars at the time, to regain control of the systems. So this was to get the decryption keys so that they could carry on. Colonial Pipeline did have backups, but they weren't fully confident that the backups hadn't been compromised, which is why they did this. The reason for the issue arising was due to a compromised password by an employee, and the employee had used that password on another website. It was a strong password, but due to vulnerabilities of using that on another website, that's how the hackers got in. You'll have heard Paul mention about the importance of MFA. Colonial Pipeline did not have MFA. So if this password had been compromised and they had MFA in place, multi-factor authentication, then the hackers wouldn't have been able to get in, into the systems. So to just echo what Paul was saying, MFA is really important. In fact, the UK regulator, the Information Commissioner's Office, has said that if there is a cyber attack and it affects personal data, not having MFA will be considered a significant failing and is more likely to lead to a fine. So having set the scene, let's go on to the next slide. So from that, you can see that there's an internal risk. Staff getting things wrong, compromised passwords, not enough sort of checks and balances there. That's an internal risk. So yourselves, whether you are a small organization or you are a large organization, you need to make sure you've got appropriate internal checks. And some of the panelists have already mentioned things about training and awareness. Then you need to also think about the external risks. So this is the supply chain. So in the context of the Sizewell project, you'll have your internal risks. Then there'll be the supply chain risks where you are using subcontractors, third parties. There will be the supply chain risks, which Sizewell will be thinking about suppliers coming on board as well. So when we go through the slides on this, I want you to kind of think about both of those aspects. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll start looking at some of the issues. So at the beginning of this, James mentioned about interfacing, and that could be through APIs, so application programming interfaces, where someone's system links in with another system. So your systems may fall into that depending upon what kind of arrangements you have, whether they are sort of linking in with a tier one supplier, or you're a tier one supplier, you're linking in with the end customer, or it could be yourselves as a supplier where your systems are linked in with some of the service providers you're working with. So that's something to bear in mind. The other thing that you could have, if it's not that kind of interfacing, is through emails. Again, something that James mentioned at the sort of outset of today's session. Now, if things go wrong there, if your organization gets things wrong, there will be damage, there'll be loss caused to the third party. So if you're working with a tier one supplier, you could cause damage to the tier one supplier. If you are a tier one supplier, you could cause damage to the end customer organization on this. So there will be losses suffered there, and there can be recovery from a legal perspective for the damages which are suffered. There can be breach of confidentiality, and that can take a number of different sort of approaches. It could be, it could be schematics which are confidential. It could be confidential contracts. It could be payment information, account details, user accounts. It can be all kinds of things. And then there's the GDPR breach risk. So if it relates to individuals, whether it's your staff, whether it's a supplier staff, whether it is in your wider business, if you're dealing with consumers, consumer aspects, there's the GDPR breach risks. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at each of these as well in terms of quantum and scope of damages that your organization could face, and therefore the reason, again, to make sure you've got important cyber measures in place. So if we go on to the next slide. So looking at cyber risks there and the inability to perform. If you get hit by a cyber attack, just like Colonial Pipeline did, and it was unable to perform, you as a supplier organization could get hit by a cyber attack. That could affect your inability to perform. Now, if you have an inability to perform, your contractual arrangements with your, whether it's with a supplier or whether it's with the end customer organization, that is likely to lead to what is known from a contractual perspective as a breach of warranty claim. So that's where you've agreed to do something in a contract, you can't do it, you can't perform, or there was assurances on the security or confidentiality and you breach those. So you can be liable for the damages and the losses which flow from that. The other thing to look out for in your contracts are what are known as indemnities. These are sort of looking for almost a pound for pound recovery if you get things wrong. So you need to be really wary of these, and you need to understand the scope of what they actually involve. So, those indemnities could apply to cyber either through a confidentiality breach where there may be an indemnity, it could be from a security breach, it could be from a data protection breach. In some cases, I've seen lawyers put it in, which I think is an inappropriate position, but I've seen it on the other side with some lawyers where they'll say, you'll indemnify us for any loss under this contract for anything that goes wrong, which is way too wide ranging, and you need to look out for that, because if that's triggered, it is almost going for pound recovery for any loss that they've suffered, the organization suffered. And then there's a concept of liquidated damages. So again, depending upon what you are doing in the Sizewell arrangements and what you're getting involved in, there could be some time critical aspects. And if you fail to comply with those, there can be sort of pre-assessed damages that for every hour, every day, every week, depending upon the criticality, you have agreed to pay a certain sum. So you need to kind of weigh that up as well. And if you've been hit by a cyber attack, that's going to potentially trigger all three of these. So something to bear in mind. Okay, if we go on to the next slide. We've then got sort of revenue loss. So one of the things that you sort of need to sort of keep in mind with regard to this is that if you can't perform your obligations, you've got your contractual liability exposure if you're affected by a cyber incident, but you're also not going to get the revenue on that contract. So if you are a supplier to a tier one company, or you're a tier one providing services to the end customer, you're not going to get your revenue. You're not going to get paid because you can't provide the services which you contracted to do. So you're going to lose that. The other thing is that cyber attacks rarely discriminate between your different contracting arrangements. If your organization is hit by a cyber attack, not only will you not get your revenue for this particular deal, but chances are you're knocked out for providing services to your other customers, and you've got the loss of revenue associated with that as well. So this is another practical dimension to your legal risk exposure and your practical business exposure. Going on to the next slide. One of the other key risks, and sometimes this risk can dwarf your contractual risks, is reputational damage. If you cannot perform your obligations and it is due to a cyber attack, chances are, depending upon the size or depending upon the impact, that will be publicized. The regulator, the Information Commissioner's Office, with regard to personal data breaches, has said that it will publicize fines, incidents as a deterrent to make sure other organizations get their house in order. Those of you who can cast your mind back to the cyber breach that affected TalkTalk in terms of their broadband call services, It took them years to try to recover from the reputational fallout. Customers moved out by the droves on that. So if you have reputational damage, that can affect not only your existing customers, your ability to get future customers. It can affect your staff as well in terms of concerns regarding confidentiality. If I ask today, for example, in this session, for someone to shout out so that everyone can hear it, your name, your company details, your home address, your financial details, and your credit card details, you'd be loath to provide that. We're in a small group here, but you'd be saying that's my confidential information. I don't want to be sharing that. So imagine that if there is a cyber breach and all of that information gets revealed, and this will be a concern of customer organizations and staff as well. So it's important to sort of keep that in mind as well. Going on to the next slide and looking at sort of some sort of quantum and scope with regard to if things go wrong. If your organization is hit by a cyber incident, what can you be looking at in terms of damages? Well, one of the key recovery things which organizations will be able to sort of seek with regard to this will be what's known as direct losses. Direct losses are those losses which flow naturally from the breach or the usual predictable results of the breach. And they're typically loss of business, profit, savings, and goodwill. So things which can quickly mount up and have a high exposure to yourselves. But I want to just touch on a case. This was over a decade ago, but it actually explored direct losses, and it's a key case in the sort of legal sector. And it was GB Gas Holdings and Accenture. So GB Gas Holdings, part of Centrica, which is part of British Gas. What happened there was Accenture were going to be providing some IT services with regard to billing arrangements. Accenture were alleged to have not fully provided those services in a compliant manner. It affected GB Gas Holdings in terms of their billing arrangements with their multitude of customers. As a result of that, GB Gas brought a claim against Accenture, and they were successful in obtaining £18 million to reflect the extra payments they had to make to suppliers as a result of the breach. So they were successful on that front. They were also successful in obtaining an additional £8 million for the cost of writing to customers and making voluntary payments to preserve the claimant's reputation. So ex gratia or goodwill gestures. Now, from a cyber context, this is really important to take into account, because it's not only just your organization. If your cyber incident has affected someone in the supply chain, that organization may say, well, we now need to contact everyone, and they may be obliged from a regulatory perspective to do so. And they may, depending upon the nature of the arrangements, feel that they have to make a reasonable ex gratia payment. They may feel that, depending upon the nature of it, so it could be a GDPR breach as a result of cyber, that they need to provide identity checking services. So that can be potentially recovered as a loss against the company which gave rise to this issue. And their GB Holdings recovered 8 million for that. They were also able to recover an additional £2 million for extra banking charges because they couldn't obtain the revenue from the billing system. They had to go for extra borrowings. That increased the charges to them by £2 million. They were successful in recovering that. So if you have a look at that from a technical issue in terms of an implementation on a software side, which has gone wrong, there is recovery there of £28 million. So that's something, again, you need to keep in mind. Okay, we go to the next slide. So I've mentioned GDPR breaches. And for organizations, this is something that you need to keep in mind. Strengthening your GDPR approach means, and it's a mandatory requirement, it's not an option. Every organization needs to comply with GDPR. It goes hand in hand with cyber. Strengthen GDPR, you will strengthen your cyber resilience. because GDPRs are protecting personal data, having technical and organizational safeguards. If you're doing that with your personal data, naturally, those safeguards will probably flow with your other data arrangements and your security arrangements. You get it wrong, what can the regulator do? What can the information commissioner do? Well, they can fine, and their fining ability is up to the greater of 4% of an organization's global turnover, or £17.5 million. So quite considerable fining ability there. However, what a number of organizations don't realize is that individual claims can be brought. So individuals who have been affected, they can bring a claim in addition to the contractual business to business claim that can be brought. So individuals, whether it's your staff, whether it's individuals that are supplier, individuals, consumers, if it's your wider business, they can bring claims. And the claims in the courts have typically ranged between £200 to £3,500 per person. And the thing you need to bear in mind is that it's not just that individual claim amount, it's any legal costs. So our firm has defended a number of organizations, and where our client has been at fault, it has been not only the claimant amount recovery, but also the legal costs, which can range anywhere between £5,000 to £20,000, even on a simple claim worth £3,500 to £5,000 sometimes for an individual's claim. Now, if you multiply that up with the number of individuals who are affected, it can suddenly become a very large amount. At the moment, we are working with an organization which has had a major cyber attack, and the number of individuals who have potentially been affected on that is over 1 million. So if you start applying this to that, you can understand that, you know, the sums can be astronomical. So it's important to get GDPR right. If we go to the next slide. So you may be thinking, okay, Jagvinder, you've mentioned all of this, but we'll have limits of liability in our contract. So we're okay. You know, if we're supplying services for £20,000, we've capped our liability at £20,000. Or if we're providing services for £1 million, we've capped our liability at £1 million. And therefore we're protected. We know what our liability exposure is. Well, not necessarily. You need to have a look at the contract to see what the contract says about limits of liability. You need to see what's excluded from those limits of liability. So sometimes what will happen is the other side may put in a provision to say your limit of liability is the contract value. However, this doesn't relate to confidentiality breaches, security breaches, data protection breaches, all of the things which will be impacted by a cyber breach. And sometimes it will have a separate cap. Sometimes it will have an unlimited cap. We have some clients who have said, Jagvinder, we're okay because we've got no liability. We say, well, how have you got no liability? And they go, well, the contract's silent on the liability provisions. It doesn't say anything that liability is capped. And we say, well, actually, you're in the worst position because then you've got unlimited liability because you haven't put a ceiling on your liability. So that's something you need to go through your contracts and be aware of that. The other thing that you need to bear in mind is that your liability cover can be invalidated. So you may think, okay, I've got 10,000, 100,000, £1 million, £10 million worth of liability cover on that. And even some of the large organizations, because we deal with the full range, FTSE 100, NASDAQ, very large organizations as well as the smaller organizations. Even some of the larger organizations haven't understood the risks that their bidding teams, their sales teams can have given rise to the organization. So, you know, right at the beginning of this, James mentioned, sorry, I think John mentioned that there's going to be questionnaires as well, which relate to sort of, you know, have you done this? You know, what are your, you know, and it could relate to what are your cyber credentials, etc. If you fill in a questionnaire, if you provide information orally with regard to you know, the questions about, you know, have you had any data breaches? Have you got cyber essentials? And you answer them incorrectly. And you answer them incorrectly either because you know it's false, or you're reckless. You don't really sort of care, and you don't really believe the truth, and you've taken a bit of a flippant approach. That will be what's known at law as a misrepresentation. It's a false statement. And if you've done it deliberately incorrectly, or you've been reckless about the way you provided that information, then that constitutes fraudulent misrepresentation. And if it's fraudulent misrepresentation, then the limits of liability, the exclusions of liability in the contract say you're not going to be liable for certain losses, they are invalidated. And the other side can get full recovery for the losses that they've suffered. So it's really important, going back to one of the earlier points about sort of training and awareness, that you also look at this element, that you make sure as part of your cyber readiness that your teams who are involved in any bidding processes, any contractual arrangements, know that they can stand behind any statements which are being made and that they're not misleading. Go to the next slide. So you may say, okay, Jagvinder, we had limits of liability, we thought we were okay. But we've got insurance. So, you know, if it goes to pot, we've got insurance that will save the day. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Firstly, you're going to need cyber insurance because your normal insurance is very unlikely to cover cyber risks. Then if you've had cyber insurance, you still may not be covered. You need to look at things like your excess. You need to look at the scope. But one of the things you need to have in mind, it comes from a key insurance law requirement. And it's a Latin phrase called uberi mai fide. It means of the utmost faith. You are entering into an arrangement with your insurer on a good faith arrangement. And it's one of the utmost faith. You are not misrepresenting anything to the insurer. And if you have misrepresented the position, then your insurance coverage can be invalidated. So to give you an example of this, think about your home insurance. If, for example, you got home insurance against theft, your home insurance is going to say you're going to use reasonable safeguards. You're going to lock the door. You've got an alarm, perhaps. So you're not going to leave the windows open. But let's say you switch your alarm off, you leave the front door unlocked, you leave your windows open, and you get burgled. Your home insurance, which covers theft, isn't going to pay out for that theft because you didn't use reasonable safeguards. You didn't do what your policy required. You didn't meet that arrangement of good faith with your insurer. Your claim will be thrown out. And this thing happens also with cyber risk insurance policies. As a firm, we act for both customer and supplier organizations. We act for insured, we act for insurers as well. There was one that I had a few years ago where our insurance team referred it to me. We were acting for the insurer, and it was for a massive incident which hit national news headlines. They suffered a massive loss, but that organization had cyber risk insurance for £20 million. The insurance team in our firm said, Jagvinder, do we have to pay on this? I had a look at the documentation. The initial documentation, which was filled in as part of the insurance application, and the audit report that was provided, flagged that there were certain key failings as part of the penetration testing report. A year later, when that company had a cyber attack, the hackers got in through one of those vulnerabilities which had been flagged in that initial report as requiring remedial action. As a result, the insured had not complied with their good faith obligations, and therefore the insurance claim for £20 million was invalidated. The other thing you need to bear in mind is if you enter into a contractual arrangement, eyes closed, and you just sign on the dotted line, chances are your insurance will be invalidated because that's an unacceptable risk that you're entering into. You're not trying to minimize your insurer's liability exposure. The other thing, especially with this, with these arrangements with Sizewell, if it's something new you are about to do with Sizewell, if you are about to accept a higher liability or risk exposure, you need to let your insurers know that. Otherwise, again, your insurance can be invalidated. So if for example, you have you're asking me to, if I came to you and I said, look, I want you to underwrite this, if I get things wrong, I want you to pay up, and you say, Jagvinder, this is the premium we're going to charge based on what you've told me. But if I then do something which is higher risk or something completely new, and I say, pay me up because it's that, you can say, well, Jagvinder, you never told me about those higher risk things. Either we wouldn't have insured you, or we would have charged you extra. Same principle applies. If you're going to do something new, something higher risk, you need to run it past your insurers. And then another way that your insurance can be invalidated, your cyber risk insurance can be invalidated, is if you disclose your insurance policy. Again, loads of large corporates get this wrong, and smaller organizations get it wrong frequently. As part of a tender process, they may ask about your insurance, and they may even say, we want a copy of your insurance policy. Or they may say, you'll accept liability up to your insurance coverage. If you do any of that, your insurance will be invalidated. Why? Because you haven't complied with your requirement of good faith arrangements with your insurer to minimize their liability exposure. So what do you need to do? You need to go back to your insurer or your broker, say, this is what I've been asked for. Can you either provide me with a insurance broker's letter, insurance certificate, or tell me what I am able to disclose to guard against that risk? Going on to the next slide. So if you have got your house in order, you said, okay, we've got that piece right. Make sure that things don't go downhill because of any subcontracting arrangements you enter into. Again, from Sizewell's perspective, if the arrangements are all good there, the supply chain is weak, it's giving risk to them, same to yourselves as suppliers. So by entering into a contractual arrangement, the risk remains with you. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of force majeure. This is sort of a get out of jail free card to say things beyond your reasonable control occurred. You will not get the benefit of that if you don't have an express clause in the contract. So it's not a principle which automatically applies. You have to have a clause. You have to see how that's drafted. And even then, just by giving the obligations to your subcontractor, that will not get you off the hook, even under a force majeure provision. So that's something that you need to bear in mind. Therefore, you need to have appropriate contractual flow down, as it's known. So if you've agreed to certain security certification obligations and you have a subcontracting arrangement, you've got to have that back-to-back arrangement with your subcontractor. If, for example, you've required to have Cyber Essentials Plus and your subcontractor doesn't, and they're involved in this arrangement, which has a bearing on those services, then you will be in breach because you didn't flow that through. The other thing you need to bear in mind is you need to do due diligence. You just can't rely upon the contract itself. Ticketmaster tried to do this and it got fined £1 million. They said, we've got a great contract. This is what it says. There was a data breach. It was due to malware getting onto the service providers' systems. Ticketmaster said, this isn't our problem. We've outsourced it completely. We don't even know what the service provider is doing in terms of security, their patches or anything else. It's all their fault. And the regulator, the ICO, said, well, that's the crux of the issue. You should have done more due diligence. You should have found out what was happening. Again, when we're acting for the full range of companies from SMEs to large corporates, we found this due diligence is not being done. It's a massive risk exposure. The other thing you need to bear in mind with risk exposure and due diligence is you need to have a look at that full supply chain. You need to have a look at, you may remember the Move It issue. So this was software used for file transfers. There was malware there, affected a whole load of companies. Some companies knew it affected them because they were using it. Some companies didn't know right up front that it affected them because it was their third-party service providers, for example, payroll providers, that were using this software. So again, from a due diligence perspective, you need to get on top of this. Going on to the next slide. So we're just coming up to our penultimate slide. So we've gone through a lot. We've tried to cram through a lot. As I say, the final slide, there's some more helpful information for future reference, which I'll mention, but you need to take a proactive approach to this. For cyber preparation, GDPR preparation, you need to be doing your own security prep, your audit arrangements internally to get your house in order. You need to have appropriate training. There was a fine, I think it was just over a year ago, Interserve, they got fined £4.4 million. And that one of the key reasons for that was the regulator said there wasn't internal training. It was due to a phishing attack, and the regulator said If you had given internal training to your staff to guard against phishing attacks, this wouldn't have happened. And the ICO said, our office is going to provide equally big fines if we find out organizations aren't having appropriate GDPR training to guard against cyber risks. You've got to make sure you've got your breach response arrangements. So you've got to make sure that you've got your internal processes. If you've been hit by a cyber attack, who are the relevant peoples? How are you going to deal with this? You've got to have business continuity and disaster recovery measures for backups. Make sure they're segregated from your live environment. So ransomware on your front end doesn't just propagate into your backup and then you've got no backup. Don't make ransom payments. UK government, National Cybersecurity Centre, the Law Society have all made it quite clear that ransom payments should not be paid. The regulator, the ICO, has said ransom payments should not be paid. That is not a mitigation measure. And what you are flagging to the regulator, what are you flagging to potential litigants, claimants, is because you had to pay a ransom payment, you didn't have appropriate business continuity disaster recovery. It may allow a claim under contractual arrangements. It may allow a negligence claim as well. Make sure you've got your external specialists teed up. You are going to need IT specialists, whether for containment or remediation. The National Cybersecurity Centre, which some of the panelists have mentioned, have got some great details there. They've got sort of accredited organizations there. The National Computing Centre, the NCC, they offer these kind of services as well. So you should already tee that up, because if you get hit by a breach in the next 5 minutes, you've got your business to deal with, and then you've got to try to engage someone to actually deal with it. You might as well get them on speed dial so that you know who to go to. National Cybersecurity Centre, as the panelists have mentioned, got some great information there, and they can also help with certain breaches as well. So keep them in mind. And then on the legals, have that in mind. If you get hit by a cyber attack, you've got to deal with all of your business operations, and you've got to deal with the legal fallout. If it is a notifiable event, especially if it's GDPR, or if you're stock market listed, you have a very short period to deal with that. So we deal with both the stock market listing notifications, we deal with organizations in other sectors who are regulated, their notifications, and the ICO as well. With the ICO, you've got only 72 hours, clock doesn't stop. Most cyber breaches happen on a Friday afternoon, and therefore, if it happens on 2 o'clock on a Friday, you've only got until 2 o'clock on Monday to assess everything that's happened to deal with that. So you've got to work the weekend. If it happens over a bank holiday, time doesn't stop, 72 hours. So make sure you have a legal team online on standby who can help you with these kind of breach issues, and they can help you with the mitigation. So again, the one that I'm dealing with at the moment, which is over 1 million people who have been affected, dealing with sort of staffing, dealing also with third parties who may be affected in terms of the mitigation measures with that. I've had another one with a stock market listed company a few weeks ago, and I've had to deal with their arrangements in terms of mitigation, because if you get this wrong, it can open yourselves up greatly. The notification, some organizations make the notification direct to the ICO. You've got to be very careful. Touch wood, every notification I've made for clients, my clients have got off without any fines or action. There have been some where we have been engaged after the event, and we've had a look at that notification, and we're like, we wish you hadn't said that, because it's opened up a full-blown investigation, and those documents can be disclosable in any claims. So with our final slide, hopefully you found this information useful. Hopefully you haven't got too much of a headache. If you have, pop into Boots. But we've compressed quite a lot in that. At our firm, I present Tech Talk webinars and a Tech Talk newsletter quarterly. It's free of charge. If you're interested in signing up to those, my email address is at the bottom there. Drop me a line if you want to be signed up to either or both of them. We have the full range of organizations attending those, again, from SMEs all the way to NASDAQ and FTSE companies. We've been running those for over 3 years. We've had thousands of delegates attend and consistently great feedback. And the information we're sharing there is the type of information we're sharing here. So it can just help you in that IT, data protection, cyber world, because as you can probably gather from what I've mentioned, it all goes together and you need to take a holistic approach. Thank you for that. I'll pass back over to Ashley.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jack. Really appreciate that. And thank you to all our speakers. It's, you know, it's a huge topic. I think, as has been said today, it's kind of increasingly becoming more and more prevalent, I think. And as was mentioned earlier, when through the Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre, through their bit, actually just by being associated with Sizewell, it will put a bit of attention on you as a business or you as an organisation, because it is such a public and vitally important project. So thank you, everyone. There's a couple of questions that and in fact one got answered, so I will read it out, and I'll read the answer out anyway. With documentation marked as confidential, how does this apply to tools such as ChatGPT in formulating responses? For example, you're working on a response to a tender and you don't fully understand it. You may put this into ChatGPT to gain further insights. Is this allowed? And John, very kindly from Atkins, replied, so confidential information should not be fed into generative AI tools or large language models. And in the classified space, there is reference to its use in contractual security requirements. Once you've lost control of that material, it's freely available in future for others to use the tool. So I think short answer, yeah, ideally no. I think Paul's also going to add a little comment to that as well. I think there's a couple of questions that appeared in the chat between us, and I'll just quickly ask if maybe James or anyone else can answer this. Are there going to be any minimum standards around cyber resilience for contractors on Sizewell? So James, I don't know if you're about and able to come on, whether this is still a smidge too early or maybe different when the alliance take over, and we can elaborate on that point. But yeah, are there going to be any minimum standards that businesses who want to be part of Sizewell should at least be looking at as a 0.0?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So we mentioned the contractor baseline library. I think that's where these things will turn up. But as you've already said, I think it's possibly slightly early for that at the moment. I would imagine we'd develop that with the tier one partners and then reissue those contract baselines.
Fantastic. So and so for everyone on the call, that's one of the key roles which we will be playing. So as the tier ones come in and the formal alliances come into place, we will be working with them to understand those, if you like, the non-negotiables, the things you have to be able to do to at least get to that front door, as we always describe it. You know, that is our role, to help you as a business understand what it is you've got to do. At that point, you can decide, you know, do I want to do that? If I don't do that, I can't work on size. But okay, does that matter to me? Do I want to do other stuff, etc.? But as per all the points today, certainly when you're talking cybersecurity, it's just good practice now. And I think, I know two-factor authentication got mentioned quite a bit today. And a great example of that is through Compete For, where the opportunities are listed, because that uses two-factor authentication. And there was a big opportunity posted last night, and sure enough, I've had two companies come back to me today who are not used to using two-factor authentication that are now struggling to get access to those opportunities for that reason. So actually, these things are good practice for day-to-day work. John, go for it as well, please.
Yeah, just adding to what James said there. Department, I only touched on it very briefly, but the Department for Energy Security at Zero are seeking to mandate the cyber essential scheme in the nuclear supply chain. So that's something that you may find will be non-negotiable. So if you're not already looking at CE plus, I would imagine, then you might want to tee that up relatively. Plus, you've got, obviously, Sizewell does have its contractual security alliance, which does, give a level of, flavor of what you need as well. But the CE plus is going to be a big push.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you, John. And I know, again, because of the use of Compete For, I know a number of people have queried that with us in the past, because actually when you're registering as a business on Compete For, it asks that specific question. And that's not to do with Sizewell, that's because actually Compete For as a platform is used for central government procurement, and exactly that same reason. And with Sizewell now having the UK government as its majority shareholder, I think it would be a very sensible decision for any business wanting to work on this project to consider Cyber Essentials to be one of those things to look into and invest into. There was another question to come on. So what is the stance on tools such as GitHub Copilot when writing applications that may be used in this space? Again, I'm going to open this out to any of the speakers because some of these things are completely new to me. I can't even remotely try and guess what GitHub is. But if anyone is able to come on and pass comment, I don't know if maybe that's John again, as you answered the previous question regarding AI, but or James. Oh, Jack.
Can I just mention, so GitHub, I think they got taken over by Microsoft. There's a lawsuit currently launched against them about the code which has actually appeared on there, including open source code, where it's actually sort of truncated certain aspects of open source licensing. So you've just got to be careful in terms of the code that you're actually using and the verification sort of arrangements around that. The problem with open source code is that although it's freely made available, it can dilute intellectual property rights. And again, depending upon what kind of arrangement you're entering into, that can give rise to issues as well.
Okay. Fantastic, Joe. Thank you very much. One of the other questions in our chat we were sharing, and again, Paul referenced it, so maybe James, because you spoke about it, if you could answer, will the NCSC web check be available to all contractors? I think Paul want to reference that it's only really available to kind of public sector bits and pieces at the moment. Do you know if it's something that will be more generally available, or is there something that we can maybe take away from this to look into?
Absolutely, yeah, it's a good catch. So it's not available to all necessarily. None of the tools are. We have asked about some things indeed we're not in the scope of, and I know they're looking at that, so we can take an action to update this audience via yourself. But what I would say is, looking at the specification of what that does do, there is other open source tools you can use to effectively get a similar conclusion, really, a similar scan.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much, James. Appreciate that. Okay, I mean, I'll do a couple of the final slides. Obviously, in the last few minutes we've got, if anyone does have any questions, comments, chuck them on there and I'll pick them up as they come through. But just really as a final summary, I mean, firstly, before I start rabbiting on about what we do again, just to thank all of our speakers, because like I said, it's a massive subject matter. It is going to be critical. And when Sizewell's attempting to make a project like this as open as possible, they will do everything they can through us, etc., to make everyone aware of what's going on and who to speak to. But then there is that responsibility on then the businesses to be able to get up to the right standard. That's why we often talk about there's the commitment of 4.4 billion. It's not a promise. It's not a guarantee. There's the commitment to want to put 4.4 billion as a minimum into the supply chain across our region. So what we have to do as regional and local businesses is step up and be able to just adhere to those basic standards. It will not be, preclusive, that they will not make it really difficult, but there will be some things that just have to be done. And some of them things may be around cyber, they may be around quality standards, they may be around health and safety. They will definitely be around, the way in which your teams act and behave on site. Which will be critical. And we've got a webinar on that coming, I think, in a few weeks' time. But all of these things, it's really about, listening to the experts that you've heard today and putting these into practice. So thank you, everyone. So just, kind of consider today, we said the development consent order is triggered in January. So the commitment's been made, it's happening. There are loads and loads of activity on site. There's roughly 500 people on site right now. That will be somewhere getting close probably to 2,000 by the end of this year. Certainly it'll be well into the 1,000. So this is just going to keep growing and growing now. So we need to start to, as local businesses, start to understand what we want to do, where we want to fit, and what we need to do. Stay engaged with us is the key message to that. And of course, you've got the two portals. You've got our portal, which is currently still up and running, although we'll soon be potentially moving on to the new platform, which I'll talk about in a second. All of the information, including under the support heading, things like the recordings of our webinars and the previous 7-8 webinars we've done, please take your time to visit. Our website has information about the project, news, updates, case studies, our events. Yes, a lot of our events are now very specific to certain sectors. So it's not so much general invites. So that's not to take away the opportunity for everyone. It's now about specific opportunities for specific businesses. But ultimately, we have all our information there and the team are there to help you. And of course, you then have Compete For. And this is where all opportunities on Sizewell C will be posted. It has to be transparent, it has to be open to everyone. So if you haven't already, get yourself registered on Compete For, get that two-factor authentication set up so that, because a lot of these opportunities, you'll have 7 days, maybe 10 days to respond and express your interest, to then join that process of pre-qualification, invitation to tender, final and best offer, and all these types of things. Start with that expression of interest on Compete For. And very, very soon we will migrate our platform into Compete For as well, so it's one place. But very, very important you get yourself registered. And again, when we send out these slides, you'll get all the links and you can have your how-to videos and guidance notes as well. And then there's a few more of the bits of information that we will send through to you. So I'd just like to say thank you. Our next webinar that I mentioned is on Thursday, the 11th of April in the afternoon, where we're with the Workforce and Employment Affairs unit from Sizewell C to really help you understand if you are going to win a contract, if you're lucky enough to get a contract with someone to work on site, how are you going to be expected to get your team ready to work on the site? So again, just help you start to understand those things that will be expected of you, those hurdles you may have to jump over. Sizewell will help you with this, and your tier 1 contractor will help you with it, but you can get yourselves ready in advance anyway. And it's all about the preparatory work around this. So please do feel free to sign up. And we've got other ones in May and June already on the website as well as part of this plan. So take a look at the events page, and we'd love to see as many of you as possible on there. And as always, we will record them. So I think without further ado, that's the final slide. So I'll say thank you very much. Again, thank you to all our speakers and thank you to everyone coming today. And I wish you all a good day. Thank you.